The colony of Verada's Hope sat at the edge of known space like a small candle in a very dark room. It was not a rich place. The buildings were simple. The roads were made of packed dirt and old metal plates. The people who lived there were farmers, miners, teachers, and engineers who had left Earth to build something quiet and honest, far from the noise of the inner worlds. They grew food in red soil, raised children under a pale yellow sun, and asked very little from the rest of the galaxy. And they knew the Cathar existed. Every human did. You could not live in this galaxy and not know about them. The Cathar were tall, hard creatures with 6 limbs and black armor that looked like it had grown out of their skin. They had been conquering worlds for 300 years. They took what they wanted, metals, food, fuel, sometimes entire populations, and they left behind only silence and ash. No species had ever stopped them. Most species had learned to bow their heads and pay whatever price the Cathar named, because the alternative was far worse. Humanity had stayed quiet too. Not because humans were cowards, but because they were small and new and still learning the rules of a very dangerous galaxy. Commander Ilara Voss arrived at Verada's Hope 2 days before the Cathar fleet appeared in the sky. She had been sent there to observe. That was the official word. Her orders were clear. Do not provoke. I do not engage. Keep the peace. She stood at the edge of the landing field with her hands behind her back and watched the Cathar ships descend through the clouds like iron mountains falling slowly from heaven. There were 9 ships. That was more than necessary for one small colony. It was meant to send a message. It did. Warlord Kathun stepped off the lead ship surrounded by 40 soldiers. He was larger than the others, older, with deep scars running across his chest plate. Now, he had done this hundreds of times on hundreds of worlds. He was bored before he even started speaking. His translator machine turned his rasping clicks and hisses into flat, emotionless words. He told the colonists they owed 3 years of resource tithe. He named the amount. The colony administrator, a tired man named Gregor Fassi, turned pale. The amount was almost everything they had. He told Kathun this. He brought out records, numbers, charts. He explained that the harvest had been poor, that 2 of their water processors had failed, that people were already going hungry. Kathun listened to all of it. Then he said the amount stood. He gave them 6 hours. Voss watched this from 50 meters away. Her jaw was tight. Her hand rested near her sidearm but did not touch it. She had 30 soldiers with her. Kathun had 40 plus 9 warships above their heads. She did the math the same way every soldier does when the numbers are bad. She kept her hand away from her sidearm. The colonists began moving. They opened storage buildings. They loaded crates. They did what frightened people do. They tried very hard to make the scary thing go away by giving it what it wanted. Nobody noticed Sari Park slip away from her mother's side. She was 8 years old. She had black hair cut short and a red jacket that her father had painted a small yellow star on the back of, because she had asked him to. She was curious about everything. She had watched the alien ships land with wide, fearless eyes, and now, while every adult was busy and scared and looking the other way, she walked toward the ships. She was not being reckless. She did not understand the danger the way the adults did. To her, the ships were the most incredible thing she had ever seen in her entire life. She wanted to look at them up close. She wanted to touch the metal and see if it felt the way it looked. She crossed the line that the Cathar had marked as their boundary. She probably did not even see it. It was a thin red beam projected from 2 small posts on the ground. She stepped through it and kept walking, neck craned back, staring up at the enormous hull of the nearest ship with an expression of pure, open wonder. A Cathar soldier saw her immediately. He raised his weapon and looked back at Kathun. Kathun did not hesitate. He did not ask questions. He did not consider what he was looking at. A boundary had been crossed. That was all. He gave the order with one small movement of his upper left hand. A single gesture. It meant nothing to him. The soldier fired. Voss heard the sound and turned. She saw the red jacket. She saw the yellow star on the back of it. She saw Sari fall. She moved without thinking. She ran. She covered the distance in seconds and dropped to her knees beside the child. She gathered her up. The girl was very small. She was already still. Voss held her anyway, both arms around her, as if the holding could do something the medicine could not. It could not. Around her, everything had gone silent. The colonists had stopped moving. Crates sat half-loaded. People stood frozen, staring. Sari's mother had not yet made a sound. She was standing 20 meters away with her hands pressed over her mouth and her eyes seeing something that her mind refused to understand. Kathun watched the human soldier holding the child on the ground. He felt nothing in particular. He turned and walked back toward his ship. His soldiers followed. The tithe collection continued. His translator spoke into the air behind him. "Resume. We leave in 4 hours." Voss did not stand up for a long time, and she stayed on the ground holding the girl in the red jacket. Her soldiers stood around her in a circle, facing outward, saying nothing. 2 of them were crying. They did not wipe their faces. They just stood there with wet cheeks and hard eyes, guarding their commander while she held what was left. The colony's open communications channel had been broadcasting the entire time. It was a standard safety measure. Keep comms open during contact events so everything is on record. And everything was on record. In the hours that followed, that recording traveled. It moved through relay stations and deep space transmitters. It crossed into inner human space. It reached Earth. It reached every ship, every station, every outpost with a human being on it. Voss finally stood up. She was still holding the girl. She walked slowly back toward the colony medical building, and the crowd parted for her without a word. Nobody tried to stop the Cathar from taking the tithe. The crates were loaded. The ships left. The sky went quiet again. But something had changed in the silence they left behind. Something that had been sleeping in the human species for a very long time had opened its eyes. It had not spoken yet. It was still looking at what it had just seen. It was still deciding what it was going to do about it. It would not take long to decide. The recording was 47 seconds long. It began with the sound of the colony going quiet. It showed the Cathar soldier raise his weapon. It showed the small figure in the red jacket with the yellow star fall to the ground. It showed Commander Elara Voss running, kneeling, gathering the child in her arms. It ended with Voss still on the ground, not moving, holding something that would never move again. 47 seconds. By the time the Cathar ships were back in orbit, that recording had already reached 14 relay stations. By the time they entered deep space, it had crossed into the inner human systems. By the time they were gone completely, it had reached Earth. It did not stay on Earth. People shared it in silence. There were no long messages attached to it, no angry speeches, no political statements. People just sent it to each other. They watched it. They went quiet. Then they sent it again. In the offices of the United Nations Defense Force on Earth, Admiral Sarah Johansson watched it 3 times. She was a tall woman with short gray hair and the kind of face that had stopped showing panic years ago. She sat very still after the 3rd viewing. Then she picked up her comm device and called every fleet commander simultaneously. She told them to hold position. She told them not to fire. She told them to wait for her word. Then she went to the Conclave. The Conclave of 7 met in a large rotating station near the Galactic Center. It was neutral ground, and built by 3 species together 100 years ago as a place where powers could talk instead of shoot. The 7 seats belonged to the 7 largest civilizations still standing. 3 of them had submitted to the Cathar outright. 2 more paid tribute and looked away. One, The Solvari had been quietly, endlessly surviving under Cathar pressure for so long that they had almost forgotten what resistance felt like. The last seat was humanity's. Our Johansson walked into the chamber and took her seat. The others were already there. Prex Valon of the Solvari sat across from her. He was an older alien, gray-skinned and slow-moving, with large dark eyes that had seen a great deal of sorrow. He looked at Johansson carefully when she entered, as if trying to measure something about her. The representative from the Grath Dominion, a species that had submitted to the Cathar 60 years ago and now more or less did their administrative work, spoke first. He said that the incident at Verada's Hope was regrettable. He said that the colonists had failed to secure a proper safety perimeter during a contact event. He said that the Cathar had acted within their standard operational protocols, and he recommended that humanity submit a formal diplomatic grievance through the proper channels. The room waited. Johansson looked at him for a long moment. She said, "A child walked near their ship. She was 8 years old. They shot her." The Grath representative said that rules of engagement during tithe collection events were clear and well established. Johansson said, "She was 8 years old." Someone else at the table, the representative from the Moon Collective, said that humanity needed to understand how the galaxy worked, that the Cathar had been in power for 3 centuries, that every species had eventually accepted the reality of their situation and found a way to live within it, that the alternative was destruction. Johansson was quiet for a moment, then she stood up. She did not raise her voice. She did not make a speech. And she simply pushed her chair back, straightened her uniform jacket, and said one sentence to the room. She said that humanity appreciated the advice. Then she walked out. No one in the chamber spoke for almost a full minute after the door closed behind her. Prex Valon of the Solvari sat perfectly still. His large, dark eyes stared at the door. One of his aides leaned over and whispered something to him. He did not respond. He was thinking about something. He had the expression of a being who, and after a very long time in darkness, had just seen someone strike a match. Johansson's ship was in dock at the station. She walked directly to the bridge, sat down, and opened a channel. The channel went out on a frequency that reached every UNDF vessel in the galaxy simultaneously. Every warship, every patrol craft, every supply vessel with weapons mounted, every crew of every ship with a human hand on the controls. Her message was 11 words. All fleets, all commands. We are no longer standing down. Then she closed the channel and told her pilot to set course for Earth. Across the galaxy, on ships and stations and outposts, human officers read those 11 words. Some of them had already seen the recording. Most of them had. They read the message, they looked at each other, then they started preparing. There was no panic in the preparation. No shouting, no chaos. Weapons were checked quietly. Systems were brought online in order. The crews moved through their ships with focused, unhurried purpose. A few people cried before they started working. Not after. When the news reached the Cathar command centers, the first reaction was laughter. The Cathar had heard threats before. Every species threatened at first. The ones who didn't simply beg outright always started with threats. Then the threats became negotiations. Then negotiations became surrender. It was always the same. Humanity was small. Humanity was young. And humanity had perhaps 30 warships capable of deep engagement. The Cathar had over 400. Kathun was informed while he was reviewing the tithe inventory from Verada's Hope. He listened to the report. He made a sound that translated roughly as contempt. He did not change any of his plans. He had 5 more systems to collect from before his fleet needed to resupply. But in the lower ranks of his fleet, and among the older soldiers, the ones who had been fighting since before Kathun had earned his title, there were a few who went quiet when they heard the news. One of them was a soldier named Kethal, young and recently conscripted, who noticed that the veterans around him were not laughing. He asked one of the old soldiers why he was not laughing. The old soldier looked at him for a long time. He said, "I was on Haran 4, 30 years ago. We took their colony the same way. A clean operation. We left the same day." Kathun asked what happened. The old soldier said, "They came back. Humans do not forget, and they do not stop." He said it the way you say something you have been trying not to think about for a long time. Kathun looked back at the report on his console. The words were still on the screen. "We are no longer standing down." He stared at them for a while. Then he went back to his duties because there was nothing else to do. But the feeling that had settled in his chest did not leave. He did not know what to call it yet. He had never felt it before. In a garden on Earth, someone had already placed a small yellow flower against a screen, showing Sari Park's photograph. By morning, there were thousands of flowers. By the day after, there were flowers outside human embassies on 12 different worlds. The galaxy was watching. Most of it expected what it had always seen before. A small species making noise, and then going quiet. Most of it had never really watched humans before. Everyone expected humans to charge. That was how it always worked when a species finally broke. Grief and anger pushed them forward in a straight line, loud and fast and burning, right into the Kathun guns. It was almost a ritual at this point. The Kathun had watched it happen a dozen times. A species would reach its breaking point, send its ships screaming across open space, and be destroyed inside of 2 engagements. Then the survivors would beg. Then it would be over. The galaxy waited for humanity to charge. Humanity did not charge. For 6 days after Admiral Johansson's message, the human fleets moved, but not toward the Kathun. They repositioned. They spread out. They went dark on standard communication frequencies. From the outside, it looked like confusion, like humans were scrambling, disorganized, unsure. The Kathun monitoring stations logged the movement and reported it as non-threatening. Kathun received the report and felt something close to disappointment. He had hoped for at least a small fight before the humans surrendered. On the 7th day, the lights went out in the Kathun's outer ring. Not the stars, the infrastructure, the fuel depots that supplied the harvest fleets on the far edge of the Empire, and the communication relays that connected the outer systems to the core command centers, the automated resupply stations that had been running untouched for 80 years. All of it, taken offline in a single coordinated strike. No grand battle, no dramatic confrontation. Human special operations teams had been in position for days. They moved fast, quietly, and disappeared before the Kathun could respond. The damage was not catastrophic. It could be repaired. But it did something more important than destruction. It told the Kathun something they had never been told before. Someone had been watching you, very carefully, for a very long time. Captain Ren Nakamura was leading one of those strike teams. He was a compact, calm man who spoke very little and planned very thoroughly. He had commanded special operations units for 12 years. He had spent the last 3 of those years working with a woman named Dr. Yael Ostrov, and who was not a soldier at all. Ostrov was a xenobiologist. She had spent most of her career studying alien species for science, but 8 years ago she had quietly begun a second project on her own time. She called it a contingency study. She mapped the Kathun, their biology, their psychology, their infrastructure, their supply networks, their political hierarchies, their communication systems, their fears. She built a complete picture of how the Empire functioned and where it was fragile. She did this because she was the kind of person who believed that hope for peace was good, but preparation for the alternative was necessary. Her files had been classified by the UNDF and officially forgotten. 3 days after Johansson's message, they were declassified entirely and distributed to every fleet commander, every strike team leader, every intelligence officer in the human military. The files were 600 pages long. They had a cover note. It said, "I hope we never need this." But here it is. Nakamura had read every page twice. The strikes in the outer ring were only the first move. Nakamura's real mission was different. He took his team deep into Kethar-controlled space to a system called Verada, which held 3 species that had been under Kethar occupation for between 40 and 90 years. 2 of them had almost entirely stopped resisting. One of them, the Ruvani, a quiet, 6-limbed species with large amber eyes, still had an underground network. And they had kept it alive for decades. It had never been strong enough to do anything. Nakamura landed in secret, made contact with the Ruvani underground, and put his team to work not fighting but helping. They brought equipment, they shared intelligence, they taught the Ruvani how to use the gaps in Kethar patrol patterns that Ostrov had mapped. They did not say, "We will save you." They said, "Here is what we know, and we will stand beside you." The Ruvani had not had an ally in 90 years. They were not sure at first that this was real. The leader of their underground and an old female named Oraveth, who had been fighting quietly since she was young, met with Nakamura in a basement room with low ceilings and dim lights. She looked at him for a long time without speaking. She asked him why humans were doing this. Nakamura thought about it honestly. He said it started because of one child. But he said that humans were angry, but he said they were also fighting this way, through the underground, beside other species instead of above them, because Ostrov's files had made one thing very clear. You could not defeat the Kethar by destroying their ships. Their ships could be replaced. You defeated them by taking away everything that let the Empire function, and you could only do that if the people living inside the Empire helped. Oraveth listened to all of this, and then she stood up and said that the Ruvani were ready. Within a week, 3 of Vethora's most important Kethar fuel processing plants were offline. The Ruvani did the work. Nakamura's team stood guard. This was happening in 6 other systems at the same time. Kathun received report after report. He sat in his command room and read them one by one, and with each one, the feeling he did not have a name for grew a little larger. Fuel lines cut. Communication nodes dark. The occupied species rising up quietly, efficiently, with human teams beside them like a strange shadow. No massive fleet engagement, no targets large enough to crush in one strike. His strategist told him that the humans were trying to avoid a direct battle because they were outnumbered and afraid. Kathun looked at his strategists. He had known most of them for 20 years. He had trusted their counsel on 100 campaigns. He looked at them now and thought, for the first time, in that they might not understand what they were seeing. He pulled up the original file on human civilization. He read it slowly, something he had never bothered to do before. He read about their history on their own planet before they reached space. The wars they had fought among themselves. The number of times they had nearly destroyed themselves and kept going. The way they built things, lost them and built again. The way they treated their dead. There was a section in the file about human psychology. It had been written by a Kethar academic 50 years ago who had spent time observing humans in peaceful settings. The academic had noted one thing that he found interesting and slightly unusual. He had written, "Humans appear to carry their dead with them in a psychological sense. They name them. They speak to them. They make decisions in their name. This appears to sustain motivation over very long periods in ways that are difficult to interrupt externally." Kathun read that sentence twice. Somewhere deep in the occupied system of Vethora, Oraveth and her people were fighting for the first time in a generation. And they were not fighting alone. That was the part that kept spreading. Not fear of humans, but the sight of them. Standing beside people they had never met, on a world that was not theirs, for a child they never knew. And other species were watching. Some of them were starting to remember things they had tried hard to forget, things like what it felt like to want to fight back. The conclave of 7 broke apart on a Tuesday. It was not dramatic. There was no shouting. 3 of the 7 representatives simply stopped showing up to sessions. They sent formal notices that said their governments were reassessing their diplomatic posture, which was the polite way of saying they were choosing a side. And the side they chose was not the Cathar. Prex Valen of the Solvari had been the first. He had gone home after watching Johansson walk out of the chamber and spent 2 days in his private office, alone. His staff brought him food that mostly went uneaten. He sat at his desk and read old records. He read about what the Solvari had been like before the Cathar. He read the name of the Solvari general who had surrendered to them 90 years ago. He read the terms of that surrender. He read what had been given away. Then he called Admiral Johansson. He told her that the Solvari had 40 warships that had not been used in combat in 30 years. He told her that his people were not strong fighters. He told her that they were afraid. Johansson said she understood. Valen said that they were going to fight anyway. Johansson said she understood that too. 2 other civilizations followed within a week. The Moon Collective, as who had sat so still and said so little at every conclave meeting that most people forgot they were capable of anything, contributed 12 ships and a great deal of intelligence on Cathar patrol routes that they had been quietly collecting for decades. A smaller species called the Thanari, who occupied a cluster of systems right at the edge of Cathar space and had been paying tribute in silence for 60 years, sent a message to Johansson that said only, "We are with you. Now tell us what to do." The alliance was not powerful, not compared to the Cathar. The numbers still did not favor the humans and their new partners. But Ostrov's files had never been about numbers. They had been about pressure points. And with allies who knew the interior of Cathar space, who knew the local systems, who knew where the walls were thin, the picture changed. The campaign lasted 4 months. It was not 4 months of constant battle. There were long stretches of nothing, and of dark space and quiet ships and people waiting in the cold of space for the right moment. There were 3 major engagements and dozens of smaller ones. Humans took losses, real losses. Ships were destroyed. People died. After every engagement, commanders read the names of the dead over the ship-wide speakers. Every name, every one. Crews stood and listened. Then they went back to work. The allied species found this strange at first. One Solvari captain asked a human officer why they did it. Why not just log the casualties and move forward? The human officer said, "Because they were real people. Saying their names out loud means we remember that." The Solvari captain thought about this for the rest of the day. A week later, a Solvari ship lost 4 crew members in a skirmish. The captain read their names over the speaker. His crew, who had never done anything like this before, went very still and listened. Some of them cried. All of them went back to work. By month 3, so every allied ship in the fleet was reading names after engagements, human tradition spreading outward like warmth from a fire. The final campaign took the allied fleet to the Cathar home systems, not to destroy them. Johansson had been very clear about the objective. They were not going to burn planets. They were not going to do what the Cathar had done. The goal was the military command structure, the warlords, the fleet admirals, and the operational centers that kept the Empire running as a war machine. Cut the head. The body would stop. The battle for the Cathar home system was the largest engagement humanity had ever fought. It lasted 19 hours. Human ships absorbed damage in ways that shocked their allies, taking hits that should have forced retreat and continuing to press forward. Not because humans did not feel fear. They did. But fear and action were not opposites to them. You could be afraid and still move. Most of them were afraid. Most of them moved anyway. At the 16th hour, Kathun's flagship took critical damage. His remaining escort ships pulled back. His flagship drifted, its engines partially destroyed, its communications cut. He was not dead. He was alone. Commander Alara Voss boarded the ship with a team of 8. She had been with the frontline forces since the beginning. She had fought in 2 of the 3 major engagements. She had a long scar across the back of her left hand from shrapnel. She moved through the damaged corridors of Kathun's flagship carefully and methodically, her team behind her. They found Kathun in his command room. He was standing. He was still armed. He was the largest living thing Voss had ever been in a room with. He was studying her with the flat, unreadable expression of a being who had spent his entire life being afraid of nothing. He did not raise his weapon. Voss kept hers pointed at him and told him to drop his. He looked at her for a long time. Then he set it down on the floor. She did not lower hers. He spoke through his translator. He said, "I have ended hundreds of worlds. I have killed thousands of your kind. You are here because of one child." He said it as if he was still trying to understand it. Voss said, "Yes." He said, "Why?" She was one small life. Voss looked at him. She thought about Sari Park in the red jacket with the yellow star. She thought about the 47-second recording. She thought about 4 months of space and fire and names read aloud in cold ships. She said, "Because she was ours. And every child in every species you have ever killed was someone's. You just never met a species that remembered all of them." Kathun was silent for a long time. He said, "We have killed children before, many times." Voss said, "We know." He said, "No species has ever responded like this." Voss said, "We know that too." Kathun looked down at his weapon on the floor. He looked around his damaged command room. He looked at the battle data still scrolling on the screens, his ships retreating, his command network collapsing, the fleet he had built over 30 years breaking apart across the system. He looked back at Voss. He said something that his translator struggled with. The machine rendered it as, "This sensation." What is it called? Voss understood what he was asking. She had seen it on the faces of soldiers who had survived things they should not have survived. She had felt it herself, kneeling on the ground in a colony on the edge of space, holding a child in a red jacket. She said, "That's grief." He was quiet. She said, "You're feeling it because it's over, and you know what it cost." He said, "I have never felt this before." Voss lowered her weapon slowly. She said, "I know. That's the problem." She told him he was under arrest. She told him he would stand trial. She told him he would not be executed without due process, because humanity did not do things that way, even now, even after everything. Kathun, warlord of the Third Harvest Fleet, who had never surrendered to anything in 300 years of war, put his hands forward. His translator clicked and hummed. He said, "I understand." The war ended without a ceremony, and there was no single moment where someone signed a document and everyone cheered. It ended the way most real things end, slowly, in pieces, as one by one the parts of the Empire stopped working, and the people inside it stopped fighting. Cathar warlords across the outer systems surrendered when the news reached them that Kathun had been taken and the home fleet was gone. Some of them tried to run, some of them were caught. A few were not. Those few became a problem for later. And the occupied worlds were freed in order of how badly they needed help. Human ships and allied vessels moved through the systems that had been under Cathar control for decades, and in each one they found populations that did not trust them at first. Why would they? Every species that had ever come to their world had taken something. It took time. It took patience. It took humans sitting down in the dirt of worlds they had never visited before and asking questions and listening to the answers. And the Ruvani of Vethora were among the first to receive aid. Auraveth, The old underground leader with the amber eyes, who had been fighting quietly for most of her life, stood at the edge of her settlement and watched human supply ships land. She watched the crews unload food and medical equipment. She watched a young human soldier stop to help an elderly Ruvani woman who had dropped her things. She watched for a long time without saying anything. Captain Nakamura found her there, and he stood beside her quietly. She said, "I spent 60 years believing no one was coming." He said, "I'm sorry it took so long." She made a sound that her translator turned into something close to a dry laugh. She said that 60 years was nothing. Some of her people had spent their entire lives waiting. She said that what mattered was that it happened. She said that she would remember it. Nakamura said that humans would remember it too. She looked at him and said, "Ah, that is what your people are, isn't it? You are the ones who remember." He thought about it. Then he said yes. That was about right. Kathun's trial took 8 months to prepare and 3 weeks to conduct. It was held at the reformed Conclave station, which had been rebuilt and expanded to accommodate the new alliance. 11 species participated. The crimes read aloud were extensive. There were survivors from worlds destroyed decades ago who had never expected to see any kind of process. And they sat in the gallery and listened. Some of them cried. Some of them sat in perfect silence with closed eyes. All of them were there. Voss testified. She spoke plainly, without anger. She described what she saw at Verada's Hope. She described the 47 seconds. She described Sari Park's red jacket and the yellow star her father had painted on the back. She said the name clearly and did not rush it. The question of Kathun's sentence caused serious debate. Several species wanted execution. A few wanted something harsher. Humans argued for imprisonment and permanent removal from power. The debate went back and forth for 2 days. Ambassador Doran Hale, who had been at Verada's Hope when it happened, and had been working the diplomatic side of this war for every day since, made the final argument. He was older now, quieter. He had the slightly hollowed look of a man who had seen too much and was still choosing to do the work anyway. He said that the galaxy was going to have to live together after this. He said that meant building something that could actually last. He said that justice served in public with process and witnesses was worth more than justice served in anger, because only one of them showed the galaxy what kind of civilization humanity wanted to be. And the sentence was life imprisonment with full participation in the documentation process. Kathun would spend the rest of his life providing detailed testimony about every campaign, every atrocity, every order he had given, so that the record was complete and permanent. He would speak the names of the worlds he had destroyed. He would account for every one. It was agreed upon. It passed. Voss was not in the room when the sentence was read. She was already on a transport heading back to Verada's Hope. She had been planning to go back for almost a year. There had always been something else that needed doing. The war, and then the aftermath, and then the testimony, and then the small daily emergencies of a galaxy trying to put itself back together. She had kept putting it off. She was not sure, if she was honest, that she was ready. She was still not sure when the transport landed. Verada's Hope looked different. The dirt roads were still there, but there was more to the settlement now. New buildings, more people. The colony had grown during the war, partly because it had become a symbol of something, and people had wanted to come and be part of it. The colonists themselves were divided on how they felt about that. The memorial was at the edge of the original settlement, near the landing field where the Kethar ships had come down. It was not large. Someone had chosen to build it small on purpose. A low stone border around a square of soil. Growing out of that soil were flowers from 7 different worlds. Each species in the alliance had contributed seeds. They grew together in the same ground, different colors, different shapes, some tall and some low, all of them alive. In the center was a small marker. It had Sari's name on it, her age, the date, and nothing else. No grand statement, no political message, just her name and the facts of her. The people who had placed it there believed that was enough. The people who had come from other worlds to see it agreed. Voss stood at the edge of the garden for a while. She looked at the flowers. She looked at the marker. The late afternoon sun was the pale yellow that she remembered from the first time she had stood here, on the worst day of her life. She reached into the front pocket of her jacket and took out a photograph. It was worn at the edges from being handled many times, and the image showed a small girl with short black hair, laughing at something outside the frame. Voss did not remember where the photograph had come from. Someone on the colony had given it to her in the days after. She had carried it since then. Through every engagement, every briefing, every long, silent stretch of deep space. She placed it carefully against the stone marker. She stood up and stayed there a while longer. She did not speak. There was nothing she needed to say out loud, as she had been saying it in other ways for a year. The ceremony was later that evening. People came from the colony and from the ships in orbit and from 3 other worlds. Hale said a few words. Auraveth had sent a recorded message that was played aloud. It was short and said simply that the Ruvani would not forget, and that they were building a garden too on Vethora, with seeds they had received from Verada's hope. Prex Valen attended in person, and he stood near the back of the small crowd and watched everything quietly. When it was over, he approached Voss. He said that he had not expected when he was young to live to see this day. Voss said she was glad he had. He said, "Your species is very strange." She said, "We've been told." He said, "You began all of this for one child, one, and you carried it all the way here." Voss looked at the memorial. She said, "Every species in that garden gave us seeds. Was every one of them had their own children they were carrying too? We just started moving first." Valen was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that his translator gave her as, "That is the right way to think about it." The colony lights came on one by one as the evening came in. The flowers in the memorial caught the light and held it. People talked in small groups and then slowly began to leave, back to their ships and their homes and their work. Voss was one of the last to go. The galaxy was not fixed. She knew that. There were still damaged worlds and grieving populations and systems that would take generations to recover. There were still powers in dark corners of the galaxy that watched and waited and would try again someday. There would always be something to face and someone who needed standing beside. But tonight, the garden was there. The names were spoken. The flowers were growing in shared ground. She picked up the photograph before she left, and she looked at it one more time. Then she put it back in her pocket, close to her chest, and walked back toward the lights. She would carry it a little longer. There was still work to do.